Who's most to blame for the riots in Los Angeles? Just asking questions. Today's guest is a self-described former leftist, but now politically homeless Californian, who says that California's political establishment has enabled the violence and destruction we're currently seeing in response to the immigration raids in Los Angeles. Laura Powell is an attorney and founder of Californians for Good Governance, which was founded to fight government overreach during the COVID era. Laura, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
So we cut together a montage of some of the clashes between protesters and cops and ICE agents over the weekend. Let's roll that, and I will narrate some of it for our audio listeners who aren't looking at the video. All right, so there's some burning Waymos, lots of Waymos burned in LA. There's an Apple store, I believe, being looted. This is just a kind of, fairly standard march through, I believe that's in front of City Hall. There's some protesters stopping in a bus full of immigrants in Paramount, California, which is just south of LA. And then more Waymo destruction. People throwing rocks from the freeway onto police officers or highway patrol. Okay, so lots of chaos, obviously. The first thing I wanted to do is just establish a bit of a timeline to bring everyone up to speed. If you haven't been following it blow by blow like we have, the first thing is that there was some the Trump administration sent ICE agents into a few neighborhoods in Los Angeles. So there was one in a Home Depot parking lot. There was one in a business establishment in the Westlake neighborhood, which is on the east side of LA, just east of downtown. And then some protests started in the wake of that. That happened on Thursday. The protests started on Thursday and Friday. Trump issued a presidential memo as things were heating up, sending in 2,000 National Guard troops against the wishes of California Governor Gavin Newsom on the evening of Saturday, June 7th, meaning they arrived early on Sunday, June 8th. So the marches we saw there protesting the immigration raids where there was no, rocks being thrown or Waymos being burned, that started on, I think, late Thursday, Friday. The footage we saw them blocking and throwing rocks at the bus was Saturday, or I guess they're just blocking the bus during the day. Some fires were set near that Home Depot. More rocks thrown. So it was that evening that Trump announced he was sending in the guard. And then the next day, Sunday, is when the Waymos started getting lit on fire. The clashes continued on Monday. And last night was when the looting of the stores downtown began. So I guess with all that set, I want to ask you first, Laura, was sending in the National Guard and now followed by 700 Marines provocation or a necessary show of force?
Well, that's kind of a hard question to start out with. I mean, I tend to have concerns about the feds coming in when there's, this is a long-standing concern of anybody who cares about civil liberties. And
Yeah.
so it's not how you want to see it handled, but it almost feels like both sides want this in a way, because why are the Democrats in California, the LAPD and, the governor not taking action to put a stop to this? It's almost like that's what it feels like, that they want them to come and crack down, and then they can say, oh, look, they're cracking down. Civil liberties, that concerns me. But then again, there's a lot of chaos in the streets and no one's doing anything.
Yeah. I mean, to that point, I pulled a couple tweets that I think demonstrate what you're talking about. One is from Gavin Newsom, and the other is actually from you. And I think you're expressing sort of the same thing from different directions. What Newsom says here is, California, don't give Trump what he wants. Speak up, stay peaceful, stay calm. Do not use violence and respect the law enforcement officers that are trying their best to keep the peace. Then on the flip side, you say, I really do not want the feds to step in and restore order by declaring martial law. It feels like state Democrats who are not only refusing to stop the lawlessness, but are encouraging it, very much do want to see a crackdown by the feds. Dangerous. Um, I mean, why are we in this moment where everyone thinks the other side is like baiting each other into something? Is it because that is what is actually happening?
Yeah, I'd say maybe the answer to that is yes, but I just want to point out, isn't that tweet from Gavin Newsom a little strange because it says, don't become violent because Trump wants that. Isn't
Mhm.
that a little strange? Why
It
wouldn't he
is.
say, you know, don't do it because it's the right thing to do? That's his reason, and everything gets framed around this opposition to Trump. And this is what California Democrats and you see, the nonprofit that will talk about, they frame a lot of things. Everything's in opposition of Trump. And this has been a successful strategy in California among the, predominantly liberal voters who have been convinced that Donald Trump is a unique evil. And so they just pull out that boogeyman over and over again. So as long as the Democrats can frame this as it's us versus Trump, that might be a winning message and, that will distract from the chaos in the street that nobody wants and the interference with deportations, which actually most people do want. I mean, I read a poll that a slim majority of Americans want every illegal alien deported. And I think, even a very overwhelming majority would like to see significant numbers deported. So this is not a popular position. So the only way they can frame this is to turn it around to Trump. It always turns around to Trump with the politicians, the Democrat politicians, especially in California. And, Newsom's the governor. This is his job to be on the ground. This is and he seems to be absent. He's there tweeting about Trump. It's, frustrating to me as a Californian to not have a governor who really seems to want to do his job and is just looking to score, looking to his political future, right? That's what everybody assumes is motivating everything he does right now.
Yeah, I mean, looked at very cynically, this is Gavin Newsom seeing a huge opportunity to set himself up as this sort of hashtag resistance type figure, especially because that sort of resistance movement that was so present during Trump's first term has sort of withered and died. And it's not really clear who's going to sort of step into that void. And maybe Gavin Newsom is an opportunist. But I'm curious because you're actually on the ground in California. Is it true that state and local police aren't really doing anything? Is it true that the governor is sort of abdicating responsibility to clamp down on this? I would imagine they have an incentive to ensure that their residents don't lose a ton of property and that their own buildings don't get damaged.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, what I hear in LA is that this isn't, it's not affecting the whole city. So you can go about your life. There's some areas they're going to be affected. So most people are not being affected. There is LAPD there, but obviously what they're doing isn't sufficient. But it is also hard, right? It's hard whenever there's any kind of action like this. They don't want, I mean, I've seen people say, yeah, just shoot them all. Use real bullets. That'll put a stop to it.
Mhm.
That kind of rhetoric online. I don't know how serious those people are, but, um, it is hard because these are not people that you want to be harming. So how do you get a mob? It's a hard strategy. So I can't blame them entirely for failing, but from the images we see, it doesn't feel like there's a real concerted effort. And then, of course, there's the problem that these politicians are, with their rhetoric, fomenting this anger. They are coming out and encouraging it. And, we had Senator Padilla, I saw two different interviews where he said, my message to the protesters is keep protesting. He had, and as an afterthought, he says, of course, peacefully, but it came out as an afterthought. We had Mayor Karen Bass said, "We will not stand for this." And the this and the tweet was clear she meant ICE enforcement actions. And her Spanish tweet actually felt was like more explicit. It said, "We will not permit these actions."
Huh.
So she is coming out, and that was her. I think it was Friday where that started. Where everything really exploded, where politicians became aware and started speaking about it. But so I think you can't say he's trying when it seems like or Newsom and other authorities are really trying when it sounds like they're encouraging them.
Do we have any evidence to indicate that any of the people currently protesting and more specifically rioting are people who do this almost professionally versus people who have spontaneously decided to embrace this cause?
I know there's a lot of opinions out there. There's sort of conspiracy theorists that say, these are paid actors. And I don't tend to believe that. And that's, I think, because I come from the left and I have experience and I know that there's people out there that are, very passionate and they're driven by this rhetoric that you hear. Trump
You're like,
is.
"They're really like this. They don't need to be paid to be like this."
Yeah, I mean, and I think maybe now we have more people. I often hear people, how do these people have so much time to go out and do this? I mean, there's a lot of people drop out of the workforce. There's a lot of people going to school for long periods that really have a lot of time. There definitely are people who are professionals as well in that mix because, I mean, those nonprofits, that's almost what they do full time is organize and, activate so they can get the crowds come in. But I mean, definitely people have a job of being an activist and they show up at these things. To me, the rule of thumb too is when you see signs that are printed, somebody paid for those and planned those. When you see the hand-drawn signs on cardboard, maybe that's spontaneous, although maybe they're going to start faking those as a more sophisticated tactic.
I think we saw this a little bit with the Columbia University protesters, the sort of pro-Palestine or pro-Hamas, depending on who you ask, protesters, and they all had green tents in their tent encampments. And there were a lot of very conspiratorial voices, especially perhaps from the right, who were like, oh, this is proof that they're Soros funded. How else would they all have the exact same tents? And then some sort of more sober minds chimed in and were like, hey, I'm noticing that the cheapest tent you can acquire on Amazon looks exactly like that. Like there's an Occam's razor, explanation for this, not just a Soros explanation. And I feel like as I sift through this media environment, this is increasingly something where I really want to hear from like people on the ground and actually understand, like, do you have a sense of sort of who's behind this? And there's probably multiple elements at play. It's infrequently one or the other entirely. But I never want to indulge the super conspiratorial mindset, and yet at the same time, I am curious about, like, how is it that all these people have so much time to devote to this during the middle of the week? Yeah, I really appreciate your insight and sort of, your ability to engage with that really well.
And
And one thing
go ahead, Laura. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
So one thing, that dawned on me, I was listening to people saying, well, look at these people waving the Mexican flag. Why don't they go back home to Mexico if they love it so much and hate this country and, deport them, whatever. And there was this assumption that these people protesting were immigrants or illegal immigrants or legal immigrants, either one. And it dawned on me, I don't think very many of them are, that these are mostly going to be American born, maybe descendants of immigrants who are going to be out there. I mean, for multiple reasons. And I also got that I was watching a lot of footage. I mostly only heard English ever spoken. The protesters, if you listen, these are probably mostly American born. And I think some of the radical kind of Marxist rhetoric that you're going to hear from them is something they learned here, growing up here, to resent this country and all that is something they would learn here. And most immigrants, obviously the illegal ones might want to stay away for risk of getting arrested and deported. And, I really, a lot of immigrants are here to work. I know there's this idea they're here to collect welfare, but in my experience, at least in California with Mexican immigrants, they tend to really be focused on trying to earn money and work. And, it's their children that maybe end up growing up to show up at these protests.
And to this question of who is it, what is the demographic that is causing the problems? Because we've got the peaceful marches through, near City Hall. I mean, even some of that you could characterize in different ways because there's marches where no violence is happening, but you're blocking roadways and people have a right to use the road. So that's not acceptable either. But then the LAPD chief implied, much as you were saying, that there is a very specific group that is sort of pushing forward the destruction. Let's roll that clip.
But when I look at the people who are out there doing the violence, that's not the people that we see during the day who are legitimately out there exercising their First Amendment rights and to be able to express their feelings about the immigration enforcement issue. These are people who are all hooded up. They've got a hoodie on. They've got face masks on. They're people who do this all the time, get away with whatever they can, go out there, from one civil unrest situation to another, using the same or similar tactics frequently, and they are connected. Some would call them anarchists or by any other variety of names, but they're people that we run across routinely city to city, and this is what they do. So even more disgusting that many of the people who are doing this come in from other places just to hurt people and to cause havoc.
So I feel that this is a movie we've seen over and over again. I don't view what LAPD Chief Jim McDonald there is saying with too much skepticism, honestly, because I've seen it over and over. I was in LA during the Black Lives Matter protests of 2020, and it was sort of the same dynamic. During the day, it was people marching through Hollywood, and then at night, people came out and made mischief. And there are definitely groups that are coordinating online. And as you documented, Laura, there's even some funding to sort of organize certain types of action. Um, I mean, what should what would you as a Californian like to see your city officials do about this problem that seems to pop up again and again?
Well, they could do something. There is, there's been a lot of problems, and it's funny because back when I was on the left, and there'd be these protests, and somebody would get injured because the police were too forceful, and then these lawsuits happen, and then a lot of times they get put under some kind of, um, settlement agreement, so they aren't allowed to use certain force against the crowds anymore. And so that's part of the reason why it's harder for them to do crowd control. I don't know if there's anything in LA that, what rules they might have limiting them, but they used to have more tools in the arsenal than they have. It's hard to do crowd control. But when you see just no action being taken, you know that action can be taken. We've all seen it before if you've been around a protest. You've seen, police and riot gear come in, tear gas, everything, and clear the area out. And it seems like there's this new tactic to kind of just let it go on as if it's just going to burn itself out. Uh, and I think that's frustrating to see. And it's frustrating if you live in one of the places targeted. I mean, I absolutely agree with I agree with your position that it seems likely that what he said about those people is accurate. Because
Uh-huh.
I'm from Oakland and we were having riots. It's funny, 2020 was just another year of riots because we would have them all the time. Every time there was some sort of action anywhere in the country, we would have riots, and it was very frustrating. And I think everybody in Oakland, regardless of their politics, which mostly were on the left, were very frustrated with people who weren't from there and would tear up the entire downtown, and which was already a struggling city, and have to deal with the cost of that and the businesses that are already barely scraping by, and have these people come in and tear it up. And I think those people really, it's fun if you're like a young man. You don't have, for a lot of young men, it's a fun game to play, and you're sort of given permission to riot and break stuff. And, then it becomes a game of what you can do and get away with and get away from the police. And,
Yeah.
so that's sort of, irrelevant, maybe what the spark is in some cases. Although I think, I saw this statistic, maybe this is, sorry, a little shift, but that about 10% of people in LA County are illegal aliens, and that 20% of children in LA County have at least one parent who's an illegal alien. So when you look at it from that lens, you could see how when people are told Trump is going to come in and deport every illegal alien, and they're thinking through in their mind all the people they know and their family and their neighbors and other people that all those people could end up being just yanked away all of a
Hmm.
sudden. And then you have people out there fomenting that fear and telling them this is what they are going to do. They're out there at these rallies going, they're going to do this. They're going to rip your families apart. So you could see how that would have a really strong emotional response and drive people to do whatever they can. And if they can figure out what to do is to burn a Waymo, that's what they do. But they want to, they have that frustration and fear, and that's how it's manifesting itself.
Yeah, it's for me just reflecting on having, like I mentioned, lived through some of the tumult in LA in 2020. It's true that right now, as back then, that this is happening in just small parts of the city. I mean, LA is a huge sprawling city, so you can kind of not even know what's going on if you're in the neighborhood that's on the other side of town. But it still is nonetheless like disconcerting as a citizen that um it feels that like nothing is ever learned in terms of how to manage this issue. And so, I want to talk about the aspect of bringing in the federal government, but I think that has to be taken into account if we're figuring out who is to blame for this situation. The fact that we're it the this is a big city that should know, that has dealt with these problems before, should have some sort of system to, you would think, given like the exorbitant taxes that the people of Los Angeles pay, that there would be some sort of, security guarantee, whether you're a business owner, or just someone who lives in this neighborhood. And when that falls through, and creates this sort of insecurity, um, you know, regardless of how you feel about immigration, and I'm someone who's very sympathetic to immigrants, and I understand why people are really upset about these actions that have been taken. But if you can't sort of provide this like one basic public good for people, to then blame to then try to deflect and say that like you're saying, stay peaceful so that don't give Trump a win. It's baffling to me that this is still the messaging coming from the government in Los Angeles and California in the year 2025, as if nothing has been learned over the past 5 years. But that being said, I do want to talk about um, the National Guard being called in, and then the Marines, which is in a way even more alarming. This is what Gavin Newsom had to say about it. One of the cornerstones of our nation and our democracy is that our people are governed by civil, not military rule. The founders enshrined these principles in our Constitution, that a government should be accountable to its people, guided by the rule of law, and one of civil authority, not military rule. California will be standing up for those principles in court, real Donald Trump. And then he has a screenshot of the lawsuit that he's filed against the Trump administration. Uh, Similarly, the LAPD put out a memo saying that they didn't receive any formal notification that the Marines would be coming in, and that the possible arrival of federal military forces in LA, absent clear coordination, presents a significant logistical and operational challenge for those of us charged with safeguarding the city. Um, so I feel that there's a lot of layers here for those of us who care about civil liberties. There's the rights of the immigrants. There's the rights to protest. There's the rights to live without getting your stuff burnt down. And then there's this overarching issue of federalism, where I have to say, even though I'm a trenchant Gavin Newsom critic, I kind of agree that this is a state and local issue. And I feel bad for the people of LA and the people of California that are not being well served by their government, but it sets a worrying precedent in my mind. What do you two think?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with that. But like I said, it's almost feels like Newsom would be happy to have Trump do this, and then it gives him one more thing to point at to criticize him for, and that seems to be his whole focus. I mean, I've become very cynical about our state government. When you say it seems like they ought to learn something and do something, and it doesn't really feel you could say that about like every issue. There's like you can see problems and it doesn't seem like they're remotely interested in solving them. And mostly you hear a lot of posturing about Trump when they do spend money on something like homelessness. It's absolutely wasted.
Yep.
So it's hard to, it's just made me incredibly cynical about what anybody's motivations are. Somebody like Gavin Newsom, I see him entirely focused on his own political future. So I don't think he actually, cares at all about that issue. But it is interesting, right? It is flipping. Of course, once Trump's in office, now it's very much about states' rights in blue states. I don't feel like it's a principle they believe in, but it's, but I do agree that I don't really want to see the feds come in. And it kind of makes me think of an overarching concern I have is we, have so many problems with crime in California. People are complaining about, mostly the petty crime and shoplifting. And as that gets more and more frustrating to people, the response is people ask for harsher, police presence and prosecutions. It's a trend that always plays out. If you have that situation, that's what people are going to start asking for. And then you really run the risk of having, an actual authoritarian regime come in. So yeah, I don't like that direction at all.
Historically, it seems like in California, the answer to this has been rooftop Koreans with guns. But it seems as though California sort of cracked down on gun control a little hard. So now in 2025, we do feds with guns instead, which it's not clear to me that that's exactly optimal. But no, I mean, I am sort of curious. I mean, you guys have talked about how California has, over the last 5 years, demonstrated their total inability to get this rioting under control. But, like, I mean, you guys both lived in California for a long time or sort of I mean, Laura, you're from there. Zach, you lived there for 15 years. I mean, obviously, in the 90s, this was it this sort of domestic turmoil was, a huge thing. But then in 2020, it seems to have picked back up. Did we just have sort of like a dead quiet period for, like, the 2 decades between those events? Or
It was the strength of Arnold Schwarzenegger keeping it all together as governor, you know? Yeah.
I don't remember other than obviously there was 1992 in LA. Um, I'm trying to come up with any other major sort of, unrest like that,
Oh, yeah.
at any point in the 80s or 90s. So I don't feel like or even right, it didn't start again. When did it start? But I can't think of anything. I mean, maybe I'm just stupid. There's something obvious, but it's good to point out. But, it really didn't feel like this was, there were problems, but it wasn't this sort of political riots.
Yeah. I think the thing I'm really struggling with because I also, appreciate civil liberties and value federalism, and I feel deeply uncomfortable with the degree to which so many members of the Trump administration seem to almost be excited that this
Yeah.
is happening and gives them the opportunity to sort of crack their knuckles, especially given that it's taking place in California. Like, what could be better optics from their perspective? Like, that makes me feel very bad inside. Trump's continual use of 18th and 19th century wartime laws to attempt to basically extend his powers and call it a time of emergency. That really, really concerns me. But I also keep coming back to this question, and I'm curious about whether you guys have answers to it, which is like from 2020 up until now, 2025, California's leaders have just sort of abdicated their responsibility to make it a safe place to raise a family, a safe place to own property. And so, what exactly is supposed to happen? Like, is the appropriate federal response truly just leave it to Gavin Newsom and let it just go on for as long as it needs to and have senseless destruction and insurance companies will just sort of handle it? I
It's
hate to
a
be cynical, but, like,
No,
is
it's
that
that's
the
a
proper
it's
response?
a terrible, situation to be in, because your options are to let that happen and then hope eventually that the political consequences are paid and there's a course correction. That has not happened so far. Even we'll see with the upcoming mayoral elections and so forth and the next gubernatorial race. But there this is like the one of the core questions as a libertarian is like and probably even above that, if you're committed to federalism as I am, like, do you, even if you disagree with what the local leaders are doing, do you are you worried about the dangers of overriding that and coming I know that the Trump administration's argument is like, well, okay, well, we're sending the feds in to protect we're sending the National Guard in and the military in to protect federal property and to protect federal agents, ICE agents, and there's some validity to that, but then also you have created the situation by hyper aggressively injecting ICE agents into LA to do these raids, which yes, the people voted for, but not the people of California. So are we for federalism and states' rights, or are we not? I tend to say yes. But I'm curious what Laura, as someone who seems more sympathetic to immigration restrictionism, thinks about that.
Well, one thing I just wanted to note, and I don't know if this is actually accurate, but Tom Homan was saying yesterday, I think it was, that these weren't immigration actions and that they were actually all like related to criminal investigations. These were
To
not.
trafficking of
And
some sort.
yeah, and it occurred to me it's possible he's saying that. I don't know how we could confirm. Um, but I also don't know exactly how many people, I think I saw some statistic that it was like 40 people on Friday. But
Mhm.
I don't know. I haven't seen a lot of reporting on actually what went on. They talk about Home Depot, and if there was video of that, I missed it, and it's kind of would be surprising if there wasn't video. So there was just some things you were saying, sort of assuming that, Trump is coming in and doing this. And I feel like it could be much smaller scale than what
Yeah.
people are
Yeah,
imagining.
40
And then
44 is the number that I saw reported. I don't know, maybe
You
that's higher
you
right
mean
now, but yeah,
like
under 100.
44 immigrants apprehended by ICE and that was the precipitating event that started all of this?
That was the reporting I saw,
and
but, who
how
knows?
many of them are there
Yeah.
on criminal warrants though, too? I mean, it's that I haven't
Yeah.
Mhm.
seen, that's what he says they were all, I think, there on criminal warrants, being taken
No.
into custody on criminal warrants and not just on immigration warrants. Um,
Well, I mean,
so I think
yeah.
there's a perception that there's this huge crackdown, and that is being very deliberately, broadcast to people.
Well,
I'm not sure what the truth is.
this is what I mean, Liz mentioned the sort of like knuckle cracking that's coming from the Trump administration on this. I think like a prime example of it was this Stephen Miller tweet. Sorry, that's Newsom. Here we go. An insurrection. He just has like one of the videos, and it says this is an insurrection against the laws and sovereignty of the United States. And Stephen Miller, according to a recent report from the Wall Street Journal, is the person that was pushing forward these raids in Los Angeles. He's putting a lot of pressure on ICE, apparently, to up the numbers because they want to post good stats. By the way, I did look up like apparently for into the Trump administration so far, there's been CBS News reported that there's been 100,000 immigration arrests, which is in Trump's first 100 whatever days of office we're in, which is higher than a higher rate than it was before. But it seems to me that there is definitely internal pressure coming to like get the numbers up, to reach beyond pure criminality. And we were told we're going after the criminals first, and the low-hanging fruit. Not sure if that's what's happening. And you know Stephen Miller talking about insurrections, and this entire pretense that uh this is some sort of uprising to overthrow the legitimate function of the state, strikes me as dubious, and a reason and an excuse to sort of flex their power.
But that rhetoric, I sympathetic to that rhetoric because of the overblown rhetoric you've had around Trump, and I think that's sort of a deliberate thing to throw that back. And,
Hmm.
the insurrection, whenever you see signs of a Democrat saying something that sounds insurrection-y, I think I understand why people would want to point that out. I mean, one of the things that was troubling me right off the bat when the politicians were coming out and making statements, Karen Bass, and saying, we're not going to stand for this. There's no argument they're making that what ICE is doing is unlawful, unconstitutional. So encouraging people to oppose it when it is the lawful exercise of authority
Hmm.
is a little troubling to me. It's not appropriate for an elected official to do.
Right.
I mean, in a sense, didn't we sort of expect to have this showdown at some point with the way that so many cities basically somewhat unilaterally declared themselves sanctuary cities where immigration enforcement shouldn't take place? I mean, this is a common thing. Like, are we Should we have been anticipating this all along, slash, is the showdown coming between localities or states and the feds?
Yeah, I think this is what, Trump campaigned on this. I think people who voted for him are happy to see it happen. And, you're right that both sides are looking for these optics. They're enjoying the potential optics here. The Trump base would be very happy to see federal, military come in and forcefully shut these things down. They would be cheering for that. And, the other side would be saying, look how evil they are. And it does feel like there's a political game being played here. And, the victims are the small business owners in Los Angeles and, whoever else is affected by it. But it's definitely feels like a big political game on this stage. And, I just saw a meme like somehow we're funding this and we're also funding that. We're funding both sides. The taxpayers seem to be.
Or I mean, do you grant legitimacy to the idea of a sanctuary city or a sanctuary state? Because again, to me, whether I agree with exactly what it's a sanctuary from, whether it's, there's states that sort of flout or, refuse to work with ICE. That's the classic sanctuary city is. There's also cities in California and the entire state of California that flouted drug laws. And then there's even so-called gun sanctuary cities that kind of push the limits of what the federal laws around firearms are. And I mean, maybe this is like my anarchistic side, but like I think that most of that is a positive, very American thing. But perhaps you disagree.
Well, it's different to say local law enforcement won't, make these arrests
Yeah.
for people who are undocumented, and that doesn't mean they can refuse to allow the federal agents in to make the arrests. And I am sympathetic back to I was a public defender and that we didn't have a sanctuary policy,
Mm.
and my clients would work out a deal to get them released, and then they would disappear. And it turned out they had a hold from ICE and they'd get turned over immediately. And I also have like an example of somebody I knew that the family called me for help because they this the daughter's boyfriend got arrested, and he was somebody who came over as a baby, wasn't a citizen, and he got arrested for nothing. He just happened to be outside a bar when there was a fight, that he wasn't involved in. And so now then they're deporting him. There were no charges. He just got arrested for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And that seemed fundamentally unfair.
Mm.
But on the other hand, we've had these open borders basically for so many years now that the problem has gotten out of hand. So I think this is why people are more resistant, losing some sympathy with the illegal immigrant population when it's exploded so much. And it's not a good situation for anyone. I mean, maybe if
Yeah.
you're going to be, very libertarian, you get to the open borders approach. But, most liberals, they purport to care about things like workers' rights, but here they are talking about how we need this underclass of vulnerable workers to make their, food more affordable or whatever, right? That is not a good situation for anybody, including the immigrants. We should have their if you don't have a legal status, you're more vulnerable to exploitation.
Yeah. I again, my sympathies are generally that I want people who, if their desire is to come here and work and live peacefully, to like find a way to make that work. And I put much more of the blame on the legal system for making that incredibly hard for people to do than with the immigrants themselves. But none of that excuses, throwing a rock through the window of a Waymo because you don't like policy, how a policy is being executed. But like on the issue that Liz was raising, where like, is this coming to a head? Are we headed towards some sort of like, are we on a collision course? Another red flag there for me is this back and forth between Trump and Newsom and Homan, about whether or not Gavin Newsom should be arrested. It's all done in this kind of joking way, but like we're now in this world where like when did the joke blur into reality. I mean, Donald Trump is our president now, right? So I want to just play those clips to catch everyone up to speed if they haven't been following this. The first is so again, ICE Director Tom Homan basically said to a reporter that anybody who obstructs ICE's operations could face arrest, and that's up to and including the governor himself. And this was Gavin Newsom's response to that.
Home and the Borders Czar said to me yesterday he did not rule out literally arresting you, nor Mayor Bass, if you interfere in his words. He said you hadn't yet.
He's a tough guy. Why doesn't he do that? He knows where to find me. But you know what? Let your hands off 4-year-old girls that are trying to get educated. Let your hands off these poor people. They're just trying to live their lives, man. Trying to live their lives, paying their taxes, been here 10 years. The fear, the horror, the hell is this guy? Come after me, arrest me. Let's just get it over with. Tough guy. You know, I don't give a damn. But I care about my community. I care about this community. The hell are they doing?
Okay, and then of course, then someone asked Trump about it, and this clip's a little bit hard to hear because there's a lot of ambient noise, but you'll do your best, and I'll explain if it's too hard to hear. Go ahead and play that.
Gavin Newsom he's daring Tom Homan to come and arrest him. Should he do it? I would do it if I were Tom. I think it's great.
Okay. So he basically asked, like, Gavin Newsom's daring him, should he do it? Gavin Newsom's daring Tom Homan to arrest him, should he do it? And Trump's kind of just like, yeah, it'd be great. I think he should try. So is this all just political theater, or is it foreshadowing of something darker, this coming conflict between state and federal power coming to a head?
It's all political theater. I feel like the difference here, though, is that at least I think Trump supporters know he's being funny. I think Gavin Newsom is taking himself very seriously. I mean, Trump is joking, and Gavin Newsom is trying to play this tough guy. I mean, I know he's brought this up several times. I mean, he loves this. Like,
yeah, if you go to his Twitter feed, it's like just full of him saying how Trump's about to put the cuffs on him or something. Yeah,
it's all theater. I mean, this is not real. I'm thinking the showdown really is going to play out more in the courts. Although actually there isn't really a way to challenge this. They're challenging the use of federal troops, but the ICE coming in and deporting, I haven't heard anybody claim that it's unlawful. So I don't know how it's going to play out. Can you guys see the future?
One thing I'm also kind of intrigued by is not just people who are concerned about civil liberties being pissed off by sending the Marines in and sending the National Guard in. I'm curious about whether or not Trump's sort of poor preparation for this deployment will result in any of his sort of base and some of these people sort of souring on him. I mean, you have a bunch of Marines sleeping on floors. It's just kind of a bad look for Trump. Do you think that this makes a difference at all among his base?
Not that I can tell. I looked at the comments when Newsom posted those photos, and the most popular ones were laughing like you've never been in the military, obviously. Those are probably, the more Trump supporters were saying, this looks like totally fine and normal. I was looking at it, he said, they have no water. And I'm looking at him like, look, besides the fact I see water bottles in the picture, why wouldn't they have water? They're in a building in California. Gavin, are you not able to provide water to buildings in California? So I think, I don't think any Trump supporters are the least bit moved by that. There's also some rumor going around that the photos are fake, but I think that was untrue. So that's the other thing. So, people are not swayed from their views that easily. They're going to find any reason to continue with their views. But I personally don't even find that. I'm not, a Trump supporter, but I don't find that persuasive, those photos.
One of the people arrested was David Huerta, the head of SEIU, which is one of the largest labor unions, has a very large presence in California. We have a video of his arrest that we can look at for a moment. Could you hold that, John?
It was a public sidewalk. It was a public sidewalk.
on you. Shame on you. Shame on you. Shame on you. That's what fucking news. Shame on you. Shame on you. From the popular community. Shame on you. 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 Get the fuck out!
So in that video, you can see that he was standing like kind of in front of the van and then pushed away and taken away. An LA Times columnist asked, does Trump understand what this means? ICE arrested a California union leader. Does Trump understand what this means? And then I have a little line highlighted down here that says unions in California are different from those in other places. That's quite an understatement. So they're just asking if Trump understands what kind of hornet's nest he just kicked, because they're different. Unions are different here. Laura, you can talk about that from experience. Could you explain the power of unions in this state?
Yeah, well, I mean, just that arrest was a pivotal moment in this. That was on Friday because that's, I think, when it really got on my radar because that's when, like, Gavin Newsom immediately comes out and says, he's a good man and this is, wrong that they arrested him. He was just there witnessing. I mean, whether or not you can look at the clip and I'm not going to conclusively say he committed a crime, but he was not just there witnessing. They even said the SEIU people said that he was like just photographing, clearly wasn't photographing. So the fact, and this was before that video had come out, and it was immediate that Gavin Newsom is out there supporting this guy who's been arrested without any information from anybody other than, I guess, David Huerta's representatives. And that just shows how important he is that the governor will go to bat for him without really any information. And, so get the unions. I mean, I don't have the stats on how much money they give to the Democrat Party in California, but it really is clear that they are owned by them.
Hmm.
It really feels that way. And, if you're not, I mean, there's other interests that also own them. Constituents do not own representatives. That's definitely for sure. But it was after his arrest, then there was a rally on Friday afternoon at 4:00 in response to his arrest. That was led by CHIRLA, this nonprofit that's the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights. And there were some other groups, and that's where that went on a lot of people's radar too, because there were signs that were from this, like, what's it called, PSL. It's a socialist group that's really, more communist, where people started putting together who's involved here. And they still, I guess he got released yesterday. There was a rally yesterday again to get him released. And I think there's an argument that he did break the law there, but this was a big deal to get him out, and he has the full support of the Democrat establishment in California.
So speaking of special interest politics in California, you posted about what you call the nonprofit industrial complex, and you pointed out, I believe we have a slide about that, John. You point out that this group called the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights played a big role in the protests and received $34 million in government money last fiscal year. Tell us more, please.
Yeah, so I found this financial audit that went into a lot more detail about their finances and their sources. Their money tripled from the year before in 2023. I was looking for grants since then. It looks like it's still going strong. Uh, I don't know why it tripled. I was kind of curious about that, and I wondered if it could be because of successful endorsements of candidates in 2022 that they were rewarded with more money. They, they most of that money is like one big grant from the Department of Social Services. It's like $30 million. Um, don't have the details of the contract, but then you look at what the organization does, and it's mostly advocacy. They have some lawyers on staff that represent people who are facing deportation, but really they have a whole bunch of different things that are really just different ways to organize and, advocate. They also have offices in Mexico, which where they help teach people about how to deal with law enforcement when they come to the U.S., how to make asylum claims when they get here, that sort of thing. So that I mean, they're just one piece of this puzzle. There are other ones that they were just very prominent in these, rallies they've held where they're really I mean, the rhetoric at these rallies is like, "They are coming after us. They're coming after our community. They're racist. They're gonna tear our families apart. We need to fight them." And this is really serious rhetoric as far as I'm concerned to this is that fear that I was talking about before that I think people feel that they're going to actually come after their families and they're going to take to the streets and they're trying to, I hold them responsible for creating that fear, along with others. But I mean, the fact that they get it's 72% is just from the state. Then they have some local grants and they had a federal grant, which is, ironic that they had a grant from the Department of Homeland Security to help with naturalization services. And then Trump came in and froze all the immigration contracts with a concern that they might be, supporting illegal activities. And then this organization, Churla, the one I've been discussing, they filed the lawsuit in March. And then 10 days later, the Trump administration cut off their contract entirely, and then their lawsuit was dismissed. They have
So,
other lawsuits pending right now as well and other immigration issues.
so to be very precise about what is wrong with the situation in your mind, it's we're talking about a nonprofit that assists with various immigration related services. Presumably, the mission is to kind of smooth the assimilation or the integration of an immigrant they're like the nonprofit that the government contracts to provide services for people immigrating to the U.S. But is it that relationship per se that you object to, or is it that they are also they're like overtly political and they're abusing the money that the government is giving them?
Well, I think your characterization is not quite accurate. I mean,
Okay.
I don't have the internal workings, but if you look at the list of programs, organizing and leadership development, policy and advocacy. Okay, it would take me a while to read it. Most of this is not related to providing services to
Mm,
immigrants. Most of it, really, to me, I'm like, isn't this the same thing? Policy and advocacy and civic engagement, political empowerment, these all sound like more or less the same thing. This is, activism.
right.
This is political. And
Those aren't caseworkers. Okay.
yeah. I mean, they do have a component with that, but it doesn't seem to be most of their work if you look at their list of
Mhm.
programs
And
they
do they
have.
have a lobbying arm? So they're also
Yeah.
going to so they're getting money from the government and then they're going to lobby the government. So that is a
Yes.
revolving door type situation.
They sponsor a lot of bills in Sacramento. So can't they can endorse lots of political causes, and that's why most of their work seems to be around politics and, advocacy for policies and laws in Sacramento. They can't endorse specific candidates as a 501(c)(3), so they have a 501(c)(4) that does that, and they endorse Democrats, Kamala Harris, Gavin Newsom, Adam Schiff, a lot of the main Democrats in California. But it really seems like, it's a very the services to people seems like a small part of their work. They're very active in Sacramento.
Right now, it seems like based off of what we know, we have pretty small scale immigration raids, possibly related to, possibly only going after people with legitimate criminal records, not just civil violations. Um, the thing that I'm really curious about is, Laura, in your view, say the big immigration raid comes. say all of the, meat processing plants and all of the farms and all of the, domestic help that people hire, say all workplaces, every Home Depot parking lot in the entire state of California gets raided and immigrants are rounded up and yeah, they're there illegally, but you end up with that 10% of the population that you talked about before just totally wiped away, sent back over the border. When that big day comes, or if that big day comes, what type of sort of civil action, what type of voice is acceptable to be made known, and what does that look like? Like how when if that big day comes, what do we do about it, especially those people in California who do not feel like this represents their values?
I really, really can't imagine that they would deport everybody. I mean, it's just practically impossible. What are we talking about? This is over, what do we decide the number was? Maybe 45? Is that what you said? So it's really hard to imagine that that would happen. The numbers of people who are being deported are so small compared to the numbers out there. So I'm not even sure. I mean, I'm sure there would be, if they were doing what people are saying they're doing, and really trying to go in and deport everybody. Yeah, I understand why we would be seeing some large scale protests because that would be upsetting to people. I don't think most people want to see that. Um, Actually, I guess I'm wrong. She said in a poll that says most people do want to see that, but I don't think they want to see it done by force. I think they want, there's other ways to go about it too, right? Cutting off people. There's the people are induced to come here. And, you talk about people coming here to work hard, but you really can't have a situation where you're offering welfare and public benefits and having open borders. That's a problem.
I do also have a hunch that when it comes to immigration public polling, you rightly point out that Americans say they want a crackdown on the sort of Biden era border chaos. And, larger numbers than libertarians would like of libertarians actually or of the general public support mass deportations. But I do think there's an interesting distinction. You're making a distinction of like they might support deportations, but maybe not deportations using such intense force. And the other thing that I consider is like the general public might support deportations, but they might not like the economy that is wrought by that down the road. And so it very well might be the type of thing where they support it in theory, but then in practice, when they actually feel the consequences of it, it becomes a lot less palatable to them. Of course, then you're sort of past the moment of protest. But I am just so curious about like even if this happens at a smaller scale, say not every single illegal immigrant in the state of California is supported, but say you have ICE conducting raids to the point where it does hurt the economy of LA. Like, will people have sort of cried wolf one too many times? And will there not be the ability for there to be any sort of meaningful resistance?
Yeah, I'm really still struggling to imagine that we're ever going to get to that point. I mean, I think that would be upsetting to people if you really got to the point where you're talking about 20% of the children in LA County having a parent deported. That would be upsetting to people, but I don't think we're anywhere near that. And, it seems like you're referring, if I was understanding this sort of argument about the, price of blueberries going up. And, I
Or
understand.
childcare or,
Yeah.
being unable to find plumbers or being unable to find people to do construction on houses, like, California already has a housing supply issue, like, kind of everything that
Yeah.
illegal immigrants touch.
Well, although the housing supply issue isn't exactly solved by having more people come in, but but yeah, I mean, I think, gosh, you asked some hard questions. But, I don't think it would be a smart idea to just rip the Band-Aid off and take everybody out. It would, I think what people are looking for is maybe a shift in the economy that isn't so reliant on illegal, underpaid labor, and maybe a shift, where Americans are taking those jobs and maybe the wages go up a little bit and we can, respond to that and let it calm down. I know if you went in and took away 10% of LA County's population, yeah, it would be chaotic.
I have an easy question for you, which is how do we fix California's government? Just based on your experience, because for people who don't know your background, you got involved with this group, it's Californians for was it California? Sorry, I just forgot the name of the
Californians for Good Governance.
Californians for
Yeah,
Good Governance. During the COVID era, there was this law, which I did some coverage of, this medical misinformation law that was going to make it so that the state could strip licenses away from doctors if they spread so-called misinformation as defined by the state of California. And so that was like an intrusion into the doctor-patient relationship. But I'm curious about your experience going into the system, trying to, persuade politicians. What are the kind of systemic problems that you observed there? The big ones, the big barriers to reform, and is there any hope of overcoming this?
okay, we have another hour. The the problem is these Democrats who are running California, people vote for them because they consider themselves Democrats and Trump is evil and they consider Republicans to be racist and bad. And so they just vote for the Democrat and they really don't pay any attention. And they now have a stranglehold on the system. And of course, they have all these money from these funders, the unions and other industries that back them up. And the constituents kind of aren't paying a lot of attention because these they don't care about their constituents. They resent them. And this was the overwhelming thing I sensed whenever I was in Sacramento. They really resented the presence of anybody who wasn't a paid lobbyist. They didn't want to hear from you. And I made just to try to come up with a solution. Voters really need to pay attention to what they're doing with their money, and hold them accountable and ask the questions. I think a lot of people who consider themselves, devoted Democrats would be upset if they realized how their money was getting spent and realized how the politicians in Sacramento view their constituents. I mean, they won't, some of them, there may be some difference. My experience might have been extreme, but they refused to speak to me at all, even when I was the lead witness in the hearing on a bill that they were going to vote for. I had my senator was the chair or of the committee where I was going to be the lead witness, and they said, "He's not going to talk to you. Are you crazy?" Was the staffer's
Yeah.
reaction, and it's I think everybody needs to pay a lot more attention, and I think they would start to wake up to some of the ways that they're spending our money on things that aren't what we want and that don't benefit us. And I think if people were paying attention, regardless of where your politics fall, you would agree with that. And they need to stop just blindly voting for the person with the D after their name. And maybe they need to run for office themselves and, get some people or maybe a little more independent out there
I mean,
on the
you
ballots because we don't have choices all the time.
you describe yourself in your Twitter profile as a former leftist, now still a liberal and politically homeless. Was this part of your disenchantment during, that experience during COVID, living under California's government and then trying to reform it?
100%.
Mm.
That was sort of I actually just took the liberal off and because I was tired of people misunderstanding it and saying, "Oh, you're a stupid liberal." Obviously, I think you would understand what I was saying there is I
Mhm.
still, liberal values, the classical liberal values. But
Mhm.
yeah, absolutely that having my children home, living under this public health dictatorship, it felt like, where they had suspended the normal process for years under the state of emergency. And then you just had people randomly telling you when you were allowed to take your mask on and off based on no metrics. People you had never heard of. We didn't even know we had a county health officer who now ruled my day to day life. And then, that's what motivated me when there was a slew of COVID related bills in the spring of 2022. And that's when I started to go to Sacramento to fight against those. But yeah, and then along the way, I mean, I won't say my positions haven't changed at all. There's a lot of people who say they were on the left and then the left left them. I have shifted my positions because I started listening to other voices, people outside my bubble, consuming different media.
Mm.
And it's really strange to realize how much of a bubble I was in. I didn't listen. It's almost like there's this idea you shouldn't listen to somebody you might disagree with. It's just crazy. I can't believe I got stuck in that bubble. I listen to people. That doesn't mean you would have to agree with them. You can, agree with parts and not other parts. So, and I've rethought some positions and realized, oh, wait, that actually makes sense. I've shifted a bit, but I definitely still consider myself independent. Wide variety of views that don't line up with any political orientation right now.
Yeah. I wonder if that is one possible, glimmer of hope for California, is that if there are more people like you who are questioning and kind of stepping out of line, because it's been such a political monoculture for so long. But the information environment and kind of the crack up post-COVID has really changed the situation. I do want to ask you the last question of the show, which we post to all our guests, which is, what is a question that you, Laura Powell, think that more people should be asking?
Well, what are my elected representatives doing with my money
Mhm.
that affects my community? And who are they? Just start there. Find out their names. And then first you find out their names, and then you make sure they find out your name. You want to keep pestering them. Feel free to pester them. I mean, don't be rude, but you can email them. You can show up to meetings. You can speak till they go, oh, I know who this is. So yeah, that would be my question.
That's a great one. Thank you, Laura. Thanks for joining us on the show. Is there anything, where should people look to find your work or what it is you're up to?
I am on Twitter way too much. So Laura Powell Esquire on Twitter.
Thanks, Laura.
Thank you for having me. It's fun.
Thanks for listening to Just Asking Questions. If you want to support the show and help it grow, please like and share this episode. Leave a comment letting us know what you think, and if you have questions you'd like us to answer or any suggestions, you can email us at justaskingquestions@reason.com. See you next time.